Today I'm making a super easy, super delicious spice cake. This recipe is my grandmother's and she used to make it for me all the time when I was a kid. It's super moist and the taste just screams fall. So I hope you have a chance to make this recipe. Let's get to it. The first thing you have to do is set your oven to 350 degrees. I'm going to use a 9x13 glass baking dish for my recipe. You could use a metal one and put parchment paper in if you wanted to lift the cake out. I'm going to serve mine out of the dish, so I'm using this glass dish and I'm just going to spray it with some baking spray. After your oven is preheated, take a cup of walnuts and place them on a baking sheet. Put them in the oven for about 10 minutes. You want to make sure you roast your nuts before you put them into your dish. That way the nutty flavor will really come through and you won't regret it, trust me. Now that my walnuts have cooled, I'm going to chop them up. And while I do so, let me tell you a little bit of something about me and my history. I had a very tumultuous childhood. There was, frankly, there was abuse going on, and when I was able to live with my grandmother, which was my dad's mom, that was the time in my life when I felt love, I felt security, I felt safe, and I felt accepted. And I hold my grandmother in the highest regard. She is the one person that I truly, truly loved, and I knew that she loved me unconditionally. And she would make the best food. She is one of the people, she is the person that inspired me to cook and to bake, because she would do that and that was her way of showing her love and attention for me, and I totally embraced it. And I'm so grateful that I had my grandmother in my life, because I don't know how things would have turned out had she not been such a great part of my childhood. This recipe actually is one that she used to make for me all the time because she knew I liked spice cake. And let's just say her oven was always on the ready to make a nice tasty dish. So I've got my nuts chopped up here. Let's put those in a bowl, and I'm going to wait until we get our dry ingredients assembled, and this is going to go into it. In a large bowl, I'm going to measure out 2.5 cups or 300 grams of all-purpose flour. I'm also going to measure out 1.5 cups or 300 grams of granulated sugar. I'm also going to use a 1/2 cup of packed brown sugar. When you put your brown sugar in, make sure you break it down with your hands, because inevitably you may have some of these rocks in there that could create some problems whenever you're trying to mix your mixture up evenly. To this, we're going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda, 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon. Also, let's put in 2 teaspoons of ground ginger. For the last spice, we're going to put in a 1/2 teaspoon of allspice. And don't forget the salt. The salt will always help lift your sweet dishes. So I'm putting a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Get out your whisk and whisk this up just to mix all of those ingredients nicely together. And if you see one of these big chunks of brown sugar, just go ahead and grab it and break it down with your fingers. It'll break down in the mixing, but if you can help it along the way, why not, right? I haven't made this cake in a very long time, and I am so excited to make it. It brings back such fond memories of my childhood, when there were fond memories to remember. And that's all attributed to my grandmother. She was just the best. And I know I've said this before, but just as a reminder to some of you, she was the inspiration for my cooking. She was the inspiration for me getting into baking, especially baking. I don't know. It just brings me closer to her, I feel. So that's my story. The final thing I want to add to my dry ingredients are my walnuts, my toasted walnuts. So put that in there and just mix those in, get those incorporated throughout your mixture. All right, that's good. Let's set this aside and get a medium-sized bowl started for our wet ingredients. One of the things that we're adding to this recipe that's going to help add moisture to our cake is applesauce. This will help, number one, it's going to help you reduce the amount of vegetable oil that you put in here. And number two, it brings a little bit more of the tartness, yet still sweet at the same time. It's a wonderful, wonderful addition. I would not skip this. Some may actually call this an applesauce cake. I tend to call it a spice cake, and I'm using applesauce to enhance the flavor and to also add to the moisture. So it's 2 cups of applesauce. So I'm going to place this into my bowl. To my applesauce, I'm going to add a 1/2 cup of vegetable oil. I'm going to mix this up just a little bit before I add the rest of my ingredients to the wet bowl. Now I want to add 3 room temperature large eggs. I'm going to take and kind of break them up a little bit right now before I put them into the applesauce. It will help me get them mixed in a bit more easily. All right, put that into your mix. Stir that around a little bit. Final wet ingredient we're putting in is 2 teaspoons of vanilla. Before I put my wet ingredients into my dry, let me just say this to start. Do not over mix. If you over mix this mixture, you're going to have a tough cake that's just not as pleasant in the mouth. It'll taste fine, but the texture is going to be a little bit off. For a light, fluffy cake, just mix it until everything is combined, then pour it into your pan, get it into your oven. So, here we go. I'm just pouring it all at once. Let's just mix the wet ingredients into our dry only until it's combined. Remember that. Now pour this into your baking dish, your 9x13, and this goes into your 350-degree oven for about 40 to 45 minutes or until a toothpick inserted into the center comes out clean. When my grandmother made this cake, she would do just a regular confectioner's sugar and milk glaze over the top of it, which was totally fine. This cake is really pretty sweet, and you probably don't even need a glaze on it to enjoy it. I'm going to change things up just a little bit though, and I'm going to make just a little buttercream frosting for the top. And what I'm starting with is 1 stick of butter. Make sure this is room temperature. You don't want butter that's too cold, and you don't want to use melted butter because then that impacts the whole consistency of your frosting. So I have a stick of butter here. It's been sitting out in the room for a few hours, and you can see I can just push and make an indentation with my finger. Put that into your mixer bowl. I know that this mixer is really large, and I probably should just be using my hand mixer, but I didn't want to have to search for that and bust that out, so I'm using this big guy. With the paddle attachment on my mixer, I'm going to mix this for a few minutes until that butter becomes nice and creamy. I also have 3 cups of confectioner's sugar ready on hand to add gradually, as well as 2 tablespoons roughly of milk, and then some of my awesome vanilla that I'm going to put into it as well. All right, this is done. I'm going to remove this from the mixer, from the stand, and I'm going to give this a final mix with my hand. Let's just plop this frosting onto the cake. I'm putting it all on because I think there's just enough to get the entire cake frosted. Now it's time to cut a nice little slice for myself so I can tell you just how awesome the experience is going to be. So here we go. It's actually not too sweet. With the frosting on top, adds just the right amount of sweetness to this cake. You taste the spices, you taste the nuts, it tastes like fall. I hope you get a chance to make this recipe. And if you do like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and also check out some of my other sweets and bakes I have on my Sweets and Bakes playlist. I'll see you next time. So good. I love you, Grandma.